Something's happening.
Always good.
Is YouTube playing ball? And we are live on a Friday night. Welcome to episode 41 of Thompsin and Other Disappointments. Cheers very much, you guys, for tuning in and spending another hour with me in my cabin on Friday, talking to somebody who knows a lot more about their chosen subject than I do, and then me getting an opportunity to learn more about it. Joining me this week, I'll give you you guys a bit of a preface, if you like, in my introduction. So if you follow me on TikTok or on Twitter or whatever, you're probably aware by this point that I'm something of a news junkie, and I obsess over the state of the media in the UK. And I sort of see it as going from bad to worse a lot of the time. And I often pick out the things that I think are wrong or troubling, or I muse over where how we've got to this point and where it could lead us to. But ultimately it's just me, a layman, a guy who works in tech, just kind of, talking about this stuff. I'm super keen to get the thoughts of somebody who is not only an academic in the field, but also an international, so he can help us sort of compare the state of UK media with other news outlets internationally. So please welcome my guest this week, Professor Martin Spinelli of the University of Sussex. He's Professor of Podcasting and Creative Media there. Welcome, Martin.
Hello, thank you for having me, Aid.
You are very welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. I suppose a good place to start would be like a bit of a biographical introduction. You're not from the UK originally. How long have you been here? How did you wind up at the University of Sussex? Who is Martin?
Martin is. So I have been here for 15 years. I came for love, which is always a good thing. And my background is in radio news. I used to be a reporter for national public radio stations in the US, and a producer and a program host. And I was teaching in the Department of Television and Radio at the City University of New York on the Brooklyn College campus. I had met my wife a few years earlier while doing an MA at the University of Sussex. We had a child. My wife was an academic at the University of Kent at Canterbury. We managed to make things work with maternity leave and grants and fellowships and unpaid leave for a few years, and spent most of our time together with our son. But when he turned 3, we really decided that we needed to have 2 jobs on the same side of the ocean.
Right.
So I went on the job market here. She went on the job market in the US. I got a job at the University of Sussex straight out the gate, which was very near to our place in Lewes, down in East Sussex. And I've been here ever since. So I am currently working on a bunch of big podcasting projects. Most of them have some positive social impact built into them. Recently, I've done a podcast series, an adventure drama, sci-fi adventure drama for young people, for adolescents, with built-in pro-social, emotional well-being, resiliency messages that we worked with the psychology department at the University of Sussex to devise and incorporate. And we had some really, really great people. We recorded it over lockdown. And because all of the theaters were shut, we got BAFTA winners, and we got Carl Queensborough, the star of Hamilton on the West End, to be one of our leads. And that's really great. And that's being distributed on Gen Z Media, and we're going great guns with that. And we have some grants in the pipeline for another couple of seasons there. And I've also recently done a podcast in Syria in Arabic. I don't speak Arabic, but I managed the back end of things for farmers who've been displaced by the war in Syria and the conflict. It was to put agricultural experts in Turkey, expat Syrians now living in Turkey, back in touch with Syrian farmers on the ground to try and help them with agricultural information and support networks to help them farm in various different conditions.
In terms of podcasting, I suppose I naively or ignorantly is probably the better word, always associate podcasting with exactly the genres that I'm interested in listening to podcasts of, right? So
Yeah.
it's always like, you know, politics or some sort of like rock star's biography, or maybe a true crime thing, and you sort of forget that there's this whole other universe of like current affairs shows and sort of content that you're talking about. It's quite sort of eye-opening, isn't it? But
Yeah.
what's the reaction been from the Syria one?
Oh, it's great. We did an on the ground survey after the launch, and we surveyed nearly 1,000 people who listened to the podcast. Everybody's got a mobile phone. They listen on the mobile phone. It was really good. But yeah, I mean, the podcasting world is this gigantic ocean of every kind of conceivable content,
Mm,
and you do tend to kind of get stuck in a groove. A couple of years ago, I wrote with my research partner Lance Dan of the University of Brighton the first big proper scholarly book on podcasting as a new genre of thing,
right.
called Podcasting: The Audio Media Revolution. And we sit back at it now, and we look at it now, and we thought we could never write a book in 2021 that was simply called podcasting. That is almost
Yeah.
as absurd as writing a book called film,
Yeah.
because things have just exploded so massively, and it's such a big thing now.
It's I suppose it's a testament to that your role now, like your title, even incorporates podcasting into it. Because from my mind, and I'm not an academic, but I would have thought that within the sometimes arguably slower moving world of academia, is that fair? Like that maybe somebody who is teaching a prospectus of media, I would assume that they would be purely teaching like, you know, TV and radio. You wouldn't necessarily think podcasting would go straight in there. So that's cool.
I think,
that they're
yeah, no, and I'm really happy. I am the first professor of podcasting in the UK, so that
Sweet.
is something, and we are. But I think usually what happens, kind of pick up your point about kind of where academia positions itself in relationship to industry. I think in academia we're usually conceptually and theoretically ahead of industry, but practically quite behind. So we can kind of think ahead of the game and see things unfolding that haven't yet materialized. But in terms of teaching how to make stuff and how to get stuff out there and how to kind of develop relationships with audiences and listeners, I think industry is certainly well ahead of what we're able to do in university settings on that front.
Sure. Um, I thought you'd make an interesting guest to discuss media with me, because not only I think I mentioned this in the intro, but not only are you a professor within the field academically, but you're also an international. So your perspective of the state of British media will be like a win-win, double win in that respect, right? So let's start from the top. I'll give you my kind of take on where media appears to be from my position as a consumer. It feels to me like we have this sort of tabloid frenzy culture in the UK where perhaps dissimilarly to other countries, I don't necessarily think it's entirely true of the United States, but I think of, places like France or Italy or Germany or whatever, I don't think they respond to tabloid news in the way that we do in this country. So on the morning news shows, on the breakfast sofas, they will go through all the newspapers and it will be like, the Sun's headline and the Mirror's headline. And these are, to my mind, kind of, trashy comic book type publications who revel in showbiz gossip and exposés of TV presenters doing coke in the toilets and so on. And it's fine, right? If there's a story about drug use and there's that kind of expose, fine, let's go and talk to the Sun. But when it's like politics or like discussing a Labour policy or a Lib Dem policy about education, I question the integrity of anyone who then says, yeah, we should go and talk to the editor of these, let's wheel in the Beano next week, let's talk to so we
might as well.
So my take is that we take tabloids too seriously in this country, and that we allow them to set the tone on the morning news shows, and then for the rest of the day's news it's people like LBC, BBC, Channel 4 News in the evening, responding to whatever the tabloid frenzy was that morning. And it feels to me like a frustrating stumbling block. Like, how are we ever going to improve the political discourse if we allow these sort of trash mags to set the tone? Am I way off base with that?
I don't know that you're way off base. I think I don't think there's anything we could do about it. And I think that it is just going to change of its own volition over time, because my students, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, they don't read newspapers, and they're never going to read newspapers. And I think that the kind of the things that enter their minds, the kind of politics, the kind of ideas that enter their minds, don't begin in newspapers. And I don't know that I don't know that there's a huge difference between the UK and America. I think America, our media has historically been a bit more fragmented, and maybe a bit less docile at times.
Right.
But I think in general the two are quite similar. The British news media environment and the American news media environment, often because the same players are playing in both countries. And one interesting thing to kind of think about when we kind of talk about the relationship between British news media and American news media, the British media environment and the American media environment, is because Britain is a slightly smaller pond. It's often used as a petri dish for techniques and strategies that then get rolled out in America. And the kind of really clear, relatively recent example of this is the way social media, particularly Facebook, was trialed in the UK around the EU referendum vote. And those same disinformation and targeting strategies were then almost taken en masse and applied in the US to get Trump elected, often by some of the same people with connections to Cambridge Analytica. I don't remember whether or not Cambridge Analytica was still around when Trump's election was happening, but certainly the same people were working on both. And I don't see a huge amount of difference. And in fact, I don't know much about, you mentioned France and Germany and Italy. I don't know much about their media scenes, but I know the same kinds of concentrations of power are happening. The same kinds of sort of media oligarchs and tech oligarchs are gaining influence through lobbying in Europe that we have here. And I think it's all leading in the same direction. Yes, maybe France and Germany, maybe even more so Scandinavian countries where regulation is much more robust and media ownership laws are much more stringent. Maybe they are in a better position than we are. But I think it all kind of boils down to money and the propaganda that money can generate. Not to kind of be too glib about it, but I think if you
sorry, I was just going to say, do you think, and let me just say, my faith in the British public has never been as low as it is right now. So do you think there's an argument to be had that maybe British people are just kind of a bit stupid? They're willing to.
Okay. So you know what? Let me. I'm going to be straight honest.
We love tabloids because we love.
One of the things that really appealed to me when I was in my 20s, coming to England to study, meeting people, and this would have been in the 90s. So it was the heyday of tabloid journalism in Britain. I thought you guys were all much cleverer than I was, and I was in admiration at your knowledge of world events and political theory in a way that I wasn't. And so I think maybe the grass is just always greener, and I think there is a tendency to be more critical of where you come from. And and I don't think that's necessarily, there's nothing necessarily anything wrong with that. But I think the problems that we have in both countries do have a similar root. And I think, you know, if I were to name the root, I would name it Rupert Murdoch. You know, I think he was here in Britain with more force and more vigor a bit earlier than he was in the US. But I think any rational analysis of the impact that Murdoch and News Corp and his newspapers have had on people, you know, they've made us dumber and angrier and more afraid. And I think you can measure that, and plenty of people have measured that. That's his contribution to the World Historical Project, and him and people like him are pulling strings internationally, not just in Britain or America. So I think there's more similarity than there is huge difference.
He's an interesting character, isn't he, in the sense that he has had such a detrimental impact to American political discourse, but also over here. But yet he's from Australia, and I'm not an Australian political or media graduate or whatever, but I don't get the sense that it is as bad in Australia.
I have some colleagues in at universities in Australia, and they loathe him
Really?
More than I do. I think they're very happy that he's now, you know, Australia is an even smaller pond, and he's always had great ambition. So he's obviously more focused on Europe and America. But I think I don't really know. My sense is that the Liberal government in Australia is still incredibly indebted to the Murdochs and the Murdoch Empire, and it's a very, very clear and quite scary playbook that he has been sort of perfecting around the world. I don't know. Have you ever read a book by Noam Chomsky called Manufacturing Consent?
No, I haven't.
It's a fantastic book. If you're a news junkie, it was written in the mid or late 80s, looking at mostly the impact of Reagan era deregulations on media ownership and things like the Fairness Doctrine, rolling back the Fairness Doctrine, and the effect that had on news culture and general public discourse.
Right.
And he's really, really smart and really, really clever. He borrows that term, I think, from a guy named Walter Lippmann, who's an early 20th century American intellectual, manufacturing consent. And it's essentially a kind of a really detailed case study in late 20th century propaganda. Many of the same moves are with us today in a kind of hyper real, sped up way on social media.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Sounds interesting. It's the sort of thing that's probably crossed my path about 2 or 3 times, and people have told me to buy it and read it, and I've been like, yeah, okay. And then life kind of gets in the way, you know.
Yeah. It's not it's not a kind of heavy book of theory or philosophy. It's a very, very clear-eyed critical analysis of what happens when you deregulate the media industry, and who suffers and who gains. And deregulation almost always hurts most people most of the time, and helps protect the interests of wealth and power.
The thing with the media's practices and Murdochian practices, if you like, is everyone sort of focuses on the bias element of it. They look at Murdoch's ownership and Murdoch's influence, specifically in the right wing of the political landscape. I think for me, I am troubled by that most of his successful media outlets seem to lean quite heavily to the right, and they seem to adopt similar stances on things like denying climate change and anti-immigrant rhetoric and that sort of stuff. But I'm also equally troubled by the actual day-to-day practices of just like trashy tabloid journalists. So like over here, that sort of stuff was like we really shone a light on it in the Leveson inquiry. And I think it was the first time that things were exposed in the cold light of day of just how callous these people, because everyone has this this cliche, this sort of idea in their head of what a tabloid hack would be like, right? He'd be walking around, he'd be like a bit unshaven, probably drinking on the job, like big long rain Mac kind
Yeah.
of thing, you know. And he,
It's a bit like you, Abe.
right, yeah. I mean, my dad was a journalist, so it's
Okay.
yeah, the apple hasn't fallen too far from the tree, clearly. But no, like everyone has this idea, but I don't think we really understood how bad it could be. And it was only when these stories of like hacking this poor dead girl's phone came out, and these stories of like effectively blackmailing celebrities, sort of saying like, look, we know you did X, Y, and Z, so you can either admit it and come on the record and then give the interview, and you know, we'll talk about how amazing and honest you're being, or we're going to run the story anyway, and then you'll be forced to deny it and blah blah blah. And so then these people would say, okay, fine, look, I'll go on the record. And then it would turn out that they didn't actually have anything. They just sort of, you know, tricked them or blackmailed them in.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sleazy behavior and conduct. And it felt like with Leveson that could be a real turning point. I remember seeing, you're familiar with Charlie Brooker? Must be.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember him doing a sort of walk and talk segment on a show that he was doing, where he was marveling at the sort of the downfall of Rupert Murdoch, as though it was the sort of end of a religion. And it felt like that at the time, like, oh, thank Christ, we might actually be rid of this prick and we can get back to some kind of like civil discourse. And and now it feels like, you know what, it's been a few years since that, and they shut the News of the World and then they opened the Sun on Sunday, and absolutely nothing feels any different. If anything, it feels worse now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think you know, the tabloids are worse, but I think for me, Leveson is sort of fading in the rearview mirror. I think the world has moved on, and the problems that we were facing are totally new. Back when Leveson happened, you know, you could at least notionally, you could notionally go after Rupert Murdoch, Sky News, News of the World, The Sun. You could go after them if they defamed you, if they slandered you, if they blackmailed you. There was at least the idea that you could take them to a British court and you could get something out of them. You know, very few people did, some failed, but tiny handful succeeded. But now I think the rules of the game have so totally shifted that I think most people aren't even thinking about those kinds of issues anymore. I mean, right now, if you know, somebody can slander you in a second on social media, it can go viral in a few minutes. It could devastate your life. It could end your career, and you have there's no concept of a recourse for you, right? It's not a named corporation or a limited company that you can bring charges against. It's some anonymous guy in some village in Ukraine who you will never know, who you will never find. If you did find her or him, they wouldn't have deep pockets. You couldn't get any compensation. So I kind of think that the issues that Leveson failed to address are, again, I think we're outgrowing them. I think they're just going to fade away, or worse, kind of be eclipsed by bigger, badder problems.
Yeah, I think speaking as somebody who works in tech in my real life, I sort of feel like there's an argument there to implement. I don't know if they could do it now with Twitter, if it's too big or there's just too much history to it or whatever. But it feels like with blockchain, what you could do is you could implement controls where, let's say I put a tweet out, there's something ferociously awful about you.
Yeah.
And then you say that's incorrect, and here's the evidence to show that it's incorrect. Then Twitter then step in and say, yeah, cool, okay, we're gonna like deactivate that, and then it disappears. Like, you could remove it. The technology is there and has been there probably for years now to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But it becomes this sort of question of, well, why are things so slow? And like if you've got the legal mechanism there within print media and you have the technology there within tech, surely the two could meet in some fashion.
Yeah, I think let me. I just want to I want to ask you a
Okay.
question. So about Twitter. So how did you feel when Twitter deleted Donald Trump's account?
Um,
The gut reaction. You don't have to kind of
Good.
overthink it. Gut
Yeah,
reaction.
thought it was good.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of thought it was good too. Um, to not have him around every hour spewing hate, spewing lies, spewing misinformation, dividing people, spewing racism, it felt good. But then when I kind of sat with it for a bit, I thought, you know what? It's actually not so good because I don't want Jack Dorsey, unaccountable oligarch, deciding who gets to use the public sphere. What I would much rather have is maximum transparency in the way somebody gets booted off of Twitter. I would much rather have open sourced algorithms so we can all, you and me and academics and reporters, can look at how things are promoted and why, and we could systematically parse and deconstruct how these channels of propaganda flow through our world, and we could shine a light on them. I don't know that
I think you're looking at Twitter as in a utopian scenario where it was, let's say, publicly funded or
yeah,
funded
yeah, yeah,
by media outlets who benefit hugely from Twitter,
yeah,
and then there would be no vested financial interest where they have to make a
yeah.
return. But the
But they
fact is, they
do,
do.
and
Yeah.
that's the problem. So here's the thing. I mean, I don't know the situation in the UK, but in the US, every every digital media outlet, everything online, every packet of online information exists on a framework that was built with public money, with a giant Mount Everest of publicly funded research, and every channel is has been licensed or in some way regulated by the people through the government. So one could notionally
Mm.
take some of that back. One could notionally set up an elected panel that gets to decide some of these things on behalf of real human beings and real citizens, rather than just trusting everything to these unelected, unaccountable billionaires. I really don't like that situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think actually, if you look at the impact of companies like Facebook and the last 10 years, I think it's inarguably been hugely detrimental to Western liberal democracy. And I think you could make a very intelligent, convincing case there that you should be able to, or at least the US should be able to say, you know what, like these are American companies and they were built with American dollars. So yes, we would like to have some influence on how they're run, and maybe just temper their frustration that they inflict on democracy going forward. But I think the problem there is that because they've been allowed to run free for so long, any attempt now to interfere in how they're run would be jumped on by this sort of the tribal like binary like army of the other side. They would be like, why are you stepping in? Like, no, it's supposed to be a free market. You know, a guy has an idea and takes his idea to market. He's a billionaire now, just get out of his business.
Is such a neoliberal myth, the free
Yeah.
market. There's no such thing as the free
Oh, I know
market.
that.
The market exists, and when the guy gets to the top, he rewrites the rules so that he stays at the top. It's the invisible hand of the market always touches us up in the worst possible way. It is not something that is working for the benefit of anyone but a tiny tiny few. And I think for you and me sitting here on a podcast, I think if we can make a tiny tiny contribution at all, might be to kind of just try to shift the way that conversation happens by reframing it in different ways. So yeah, I think we have to kind of outgrow, like we're outgrowing an attachment to newspapers and tabloid news. We have to outgrow some other ideas that were hugely popular in the late 70s and 80s and into the 90s, that for which there's really no evidence that they benefit most people most of the time. There's a lot of evidence that they hurt most people most of the time.
Yeah, I think it's just a nice story that they can pull out their pocket when they get asked to interfere with whatever. They can just say, no, no, no. It's like
Yeah,
it's trickle down economics. You know, you just hang in there. It's
yeah,
coming.
yeah. It's coming like Niagara Falls. It's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose if we broadly agree that that the UK media is in a bit of a state, and that the US is not entirely different, that you do have this sort of Murdochian influence, that it is then amplified by social media's effects, echo chambers. Where do you think this leads? Where do you think we're headed 5 or 10 years?
Man, I don't know. I think so. Like, um, can I be professorial for 30 seconds?
You might have to give me a dictionary.
Oh no, no. So in the just before World War II, in 1935, a guy named Walter Benjamin wrote a really, really brilliant essay. He's sort of absorbed into what became the Frankfurt School. His ideas were he ended up committing suicide. He was Jewish. The Nazis were coming across Europe. He committed suicide before he was taken. He wrote a brilliant essay called "The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction." And in that essay, he looks at media technology, the media technology of the early 20th century, specifically things like photography and film and mechanized automated production of newspapers. And he says, okay, this new media technology has the power to do two things. It has the power to totally rearrange property relations in the Western world and to give working people their fair share, what their due is, what they want, or it can be used to aestheticize violence and push us ever closer to fascism. And one of the things that he said that would sort of push things in that sadder direction of aestheticization of violence and fascism was the ability to become an author, the ability to get your words published in pretty much any newspaper you wanted in an op-ed column, and then later on the ability to become a star, the promise of becoming a star through self-expression.
Right.
So he said, if we get too hooked up into opportunities that the media presents us for self-expression, we're going to go in the direction of Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, and things are going to be the shitty mess that we have right now. I think there's the opportunity to change that exists, but it exists on a much smaller scale level. So I think if we do want to change things, and I hate to say this to you as a podcaster and to me as a professor of podcasting, I think like maybe the route to change is to listen to fewer podcasts and to be on social media less and to be much more selective and Catholic with a small c about our news consumption, and choose a media diet that is complex and doesn't just reiterate what you already. And I think if we start to think of things locally, if you read your village newsletter or your community newspaper more than you spend time on the BBC website, and you develop real human relationships with the real human beings that are physically close to you in your tiny corner of the world, I think we might begin to change things from the ground up rather than from the top down. I think top down solutions probably aren't going to do anything because, as we've talked about, the people at the top, they have a vested interest in keeping things as they are. Why would they want to regulate things that push them out of power?
I'm interested to understand why having the advent of print journalism, or having the potential to print to have your words printed and communicated to hundreds of thousands of people, why that would allow us to slide further and further towards somebody like Donald Trump or Brexit. Like, what's the
So
connection there?
Benjamin was saying that when you focus on your self, when you use the media to promote yourself, when you make it more narcissistic, that prevents you from using it, or it gets in the way of you using it to see commonality between you and somebody else. It interferes and interrupts with human connection and empathy and a sense of a collective project. So it is a kind of privatization and individualization that leads to a celebration of the great strong man, a celebration of the genius, right?
Yeah.
A celebration of the guy who's better than us and who's going to save us all by keeping out the brown people, by building a wall, by any other number of nonsense, horrible, hateful policies and ideas. It's easier and it's comforting, and the kind of triggering moment is this kind of streamlining things into individual, a focus or an obsession with individual expression rather than something common.
But then I suppose that the natural question at the end of that is, if that's the solution, and we all know that we feel better when we've been hanging out with actual friends physically rather than just, you know, sitting on a WhatsApp chat group. It's in my mind, it's similar to if you take an ecstasy pill, and you will feel love. You'll feel great. You'll have a great time, and you could feel love and have great times without that pill. But you just have to work harder on your relationships. You just got to, you know, spend more time with your friends, get to know them a bit better, and you can still feel. But the pill is just easier. So
yeah.
it's like that,
I get that.
right? It's you pick up Instagram, you put up a funny picture or whatever, and you wait for people to give you the hearts on it, and you get the dopamine rush and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And there are neurologists that work for these companies that are perfecting the kind of the speedy delivery of those neurochemicals. Yeah. It is an addiction, right?
But I don't know, or rather, the natural question I was going to sort of bookend that with was, you know, how do you persuade a population of mostly stupid people? I know that, like, I'm saying that, Martin. I know you're not. You'll be way more diplomatic than I am.
Okay.
Especially somebody who's professionally charged with trying to educate people to making them. Oh shit! My here I am calling everyone else stupid. I've just like ruined my own camera. Hold on a sec.
I thought you were being censored there.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Our corporate overlords were shutting you down.
Bloody cancel culture. Fate, karma kicking me in the ass for calling everyone stupid. See if that...
It was perfectly timed.
Yeah. Let me see if that reconnects. There we go. I'm back. Yeah. No, I was going to say. I realise that you will be more diplomatic, considering that your role is to educate people to make them smarter. But I'm just a sort of comedian who works in tech in the day and who podcasts, so I don't have to be that diplomatic. I can say most people are fucking stupid, especially in this country. I wonder how would you persuade like half the country, 30, 40 million people, that actually they need to put their phone down? You know, like, I know you're sat in the waiting room in the doctors and you're bored, but just don't go on Instagram. Talk to the person that's next to you.
I don't have an easy answer for you, but I have a starting point, or I have something not to do. So if you want to persuade somebody to do something and your opening salvo is "you're an idiot," you're not going to convince them to do anything.
No.
I think so. Perhaps we have to take a little bit of responsibility for this. And it's so hard. I get it, man. It is so tempting to just to listen to A. Thompson and Other Disappointments, to listen to I love watching the Young Turks online. Yep. I love the podcast Unfucking the Republic, which is great. All of these things, they kind of reaffirm my superiority often by calling other people stupid, right?
Yeah.
And that makes me feel good, but that's a recipe for keeping us divided. And I think we really, really have to check that
But
impulse, and we really have to
if
reach
it
out and
makes,
try and find common ground. Like, so like you and your Brexit voting neighbor, I don't know where you live, right? Like, you may disagree on everything on the surface, but you should try to find some common ground if you want to kind of change the world, right? You do have things in common, right?
yeah.
He loves his kids, you love your kids, right? You want to leave them a relatively healthy planet when you shuffle off this mortal coil, right? You have parents that, or elderly relatives that you love. He has elderly relatives that he loves. We could find some common ground where
Yeah.
we can think about ways of allowing them to live old age in a bit of dignity, and to make sure they have relatively decent health care. We can find common ground.
Yeah, I get that, and to a large extent, I've adopted that mentality until reasonably recently, where I thought to myself, like I even did a TikTok about sort of 3 or 4 months ago, where I was saying, you know what, I'm done debating Brexit, I'm done like arguing the case for Remain or rejoining and so on. Like, it's obviously happened. And you know, this person over here, they weren't stupid for voting to leave the EU. They were sold a load of lies. But it's, you know, let's just move on. People had all sorts of reasons that they might have voted for it, and they might regret them, and they might not. But anyway, now let's all get together and try and bring Britain forward in the 21st century, like invest in tech and a lot of it I still agree with. But it's so fucking hard, Martin. Like,
It's
sometimes
hard.
when
It
you
is, no, it's
see
hard.
you see like tweets from people who have intelligent jobs, right? Like hard jobs, and here they are on Twitter telling you that, I don't know, they're not going to wear a mask, or that that actually everyone else is wrong about the shop shelves being emptier and emptier, and everyone else is wrong about the petrol shortage because they in their local shop don't see. Like, and you read these tweets and you just go, oh my fucking god! And these, like, this isn't one person. It's like millions of people like that who adopt the same mentality. You're just like, oh, we're so doomed.
So like, can I just, like, so I was where you were a few years ago, and I have surrendered in the battle of facts.
Yeah.
I have raised the white flag, and I've said, I can't. This is not a battle I'm going to win.
No.
When you have people like Trump advisor Kelly Conway getting on the news and saying, I have alternative facts, and like, my alternative facts say global warming isn't really a thing. And like, I really don't think, because they're better funded than we are, you know, you in your cave, me in my office, you know, they have vast sums of money behind them. They have vast apparatuses of think tanks and media outfits who exist to propel those messages into the world, to misinform and to create discord and to create confusion. I think the only way we're going to go forward is by trying to find common ground on values. I think this kind of, the postmodern genie is out of the bottle. We used postmodernism very, very well in the 80s and the 90s to unpick a lot of oppressive institutions, and to show that their claims to truth were suspect and ideologically driven. And then, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, those strategies, which were strategies mostly of the left, were adopted by the right to undermine all of the institutions around the world, and to kind of make people lose faith in all of those institutions, in all of our institutions. And I think we're never going to get that genie back in the bottle. And I think the only way, you know, the only way we're going to go forward is by trying to find some common ground. We don't believe in anything anymore, and because it was, I think it was Chesterton in the early 20th century, the British poet and essayist, had this great line, which was something like, when people don't believe in God, the problem is that they're not going to believe in nothing. The problem is they're going to believe in everything. And it's just created this kind of immense confusion that I don't think we're ever going to fix. And I think the only way to fix it is to take a sort of new humanist approach to try and find points of connection, to try and find common ground where we can, because I think common ground does exist.
I think there's a correlation there, just to sort of tap into. I've not heard that quote before, but to tap into that a little bit. Do you think there's a correlation that in the sunsetting of Christianity, certainly in the Western world, like as Christianity becomes less important to us, that we look for sort of messianic heroes in politics instead? So it started with, say, Barack Obama. Then it over here there was a big thing about Jeremy Corbyn. He was sort of paraded as this messianic kind of figure. At Trump in a different way, but equally it's super ideological, right? He can't do any wrong. Like, what was his quote? He said he could walk down Fifth Avenue
and shoot someone in broad daylight,
and he's right.
And no one would charge him.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. They'd probably charge him. But...
I think he's, I hate to, I don't want to jinx us, but I think he's probably going to end up in jail. I think the betting odds on him ending up in jail are greater than they are of him ending up as president in 2024. Nice. So I will go with the bookies on that.
And how would you feel about that? Would that make you feel good?
How would I feel about that? I tend not to indulge in Schadenfreude because, like you, I'm kind of worried about my karma. However, I think I would go down the road to my pub called the Jugs, and I would buy everyone a drink. That's what I will do.
Yeah. But then 4 days later, after you pondered on it a little bit, you'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I'd hold my hands up. I'd be like, I don't know if there's a word if there's an adjective to describe how much ejaculate.
A fire hose.
Yeah. No, that would be a good day. That'd be nice. I don't think I'd remember much of it after like watching the news.
But it's a kind of we live in a very, very weird time where everything is changing and everything is happening so fast, and it's impossible to get purchase on anything. And again, it's like the probably the most famous podcast so far has been Serial, which came out about 5 or 6 years ago. Was an investigation of a murder that happened in 1999 of a high school student in Baltimore. And it's a really, really beautiful, beautiful podcast because it kind of proposes a way, slyly, in a kind of underhanded way, that there is a kind of new way forward for thinking about the news. And it's a kind of new humanism which parks a lot of our old established notions of objectivity and detachment that were kind of hallmarks of journalism, but which are increasingly untenable. Everybody's got a bias. There's no such thing as a point of view from nowhere. And it kind of leans into developing relationships with sources and leans into being a real human being in relationships with other people, and is just kind of honest and open about that. So rather than kind of pretending to have an objectivity that is frankly untenable in the tail end of our postmodern age, it leans into that more human aspect of things, and I think that gives me hope. That makes me a little bit optimistic about where we might go, at least in some small scale way, in our own projects. You and your projects, me and my projects.
Yeah. Do you think maybe there's a place also for, there's a big focus on people taking a more humanist approach, taking a step back from some of the sort of fake reward systems, dopamine rushes from social media and so on, but do you think there's a place in media for more like left-leaning outlets? So like everyone, like myself included, everyone bitches and moans about the dominance of right-wing press in the UK. I think I counted the other week that 6 out of 8, maybe 9 British newspapers are right-wing in their nature. And so when they set the tone in the beginning of the day, then it actually begin with, like from day dot, like it's right-leaning. So like my question is, do you think a new left-leaning tabloid or a new left-leaning broadsheet could, is that likely, or are we through the looking glass now?
Dude, we don't need it. We don't need it. We don't need it. We have Aid Thompson and Other Disappointments. We have Unfucking the Republic. We have the Young Turks. We have Democracy Now. We have all of these wonderful things that are speaking to us in a way that we all get, and in a way that the younger generation gets. So my students, they never watch the BBC. They never read. They don't know the Guardian from the Sun from the Mirror. They don't. They live in a totally different media universe. And I think, we just have to kind of stop fighting these fights that we were so invested in 20 years ago and look ahead and try and kind of figure out what we can do in the future. And I think it's weirdly, like I was saying before, it's both more local, but also more common, collective, and international, right? The problems that we have as a species are not going to be solved by more nationalism. The seas rise equally in Britain as they do in France. It's not like the fish swim up to the boundary line of British waters before they go into Icelandic waters and turn around. And there's a sense, and I get this among my students, that they're really not thinking in kind of local national senses at all, but they're also not thinking about national news as a thing. They're just not. And I think we're seeing a change in a lot of media institutions. Pretty much all of the content, all of that legacy media content that was produced for print or produced for radio, now, yes, it may be for the moment produced for print or produced for radio, but the kind of ultimate home of it is online. It's there in podcast form. It's there in various kinds of clickbait, and that's where it's going to stay, and that's where it's going to have the most impact. And I think we are ahead of the game. The left, if I could speak about, we, the left, you and me, I'll include you in that. I think we are ahead of the game on the ground in lots of that. I do think we have an advantage. I think we were in earlier, and I think as a medium, at least before things get too segmented up by giant media conglomerates, for the moment, we have these platforms and we can reach hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And I think we just have to lean into that.
I think probably last question, because I've got babies, so I'm going to look after Martin.
Okay.
But last question. So when I remember when MySpace came out, and there was this big thing about how it was revolutionizing music. Anyone could just set up a profile and then upload a demo, and people like Lily Allen and Example, they got big followings on. There was this thing about like anyone can do it, and I remember thinking, yeah, anyone can do it, but because anyone can do it, makes it infinitely harder to find the good shit, because it's like every other person's got a profile. So do you think, as professor of podcasting, do you think is it going to be like that with this? Anyone could start a podcast. A lot of people
it's
have.
Already it's already that, but that, I'm not, and yeah, I think you're right. You're kind of right to point to something that we need to interrogate, and it kind of reminds me of Walter Benjamin's idea that the opportunity for self-expression, the opportunity to become an author or a star, is the thing that's going to keep us from making any real change in the world. There's a glut of stuff. I think that's okay. I think as long as we push ourselves to listen, and I know it's hard because at the end of the day, you're tired and you don't want people challenging your worldview, but as long as we listen to ideas that aren't 100% our own or slightly outside of our comfort zone, I think the more the merrier at this stage. And yeah, it is going to be harder to find stuff, but I don't need to find the best stuff. I don't even know what the best stuff would be anymore.
No.
I get a bit of joy out of stuff like this. I get a bit of joy out of some podcasts Radiolab. I love Radiolab. Some of those episodes cost $100,000 to produce, 1 hour of audio. How much are you spending on this hour, Aiden?
Fucking nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's. I tell you what, it cost me. It cost me a slightly awkward conversation with my girlfriend when I'm like, I'm out in the cabin for an hour tonight. She's like, yeah, no, she's pretty good.
Good.
Yeah, I don't know. I really like, and always have done, this sort of like the muck, if you like the sort of
Yep.
the low budget, lo-fi, independent stuff, and it's true of podcasting. I like this one guy. He's got quite big now, but he runs creates podcasts called Darknet Diaries, and it's just sort of a collection of stories about weird and wonderful, shady shit that's happened on the darknet. And then like musically, back in the day, I used to find like loads of like independent singer-songwriters on SoundCloud, because I just loved like the sort of like the graininess and the sort of the prospect of it, thinking, oh, this person could be amazing, like, and I've got in here on the ground level. And then when I was doing stand-up, I loved open mic comedy more than going to like the Comedy Store, because there was that same feeling of like, what if, potential here, and it's not fine-tuned, and it's sort of, so I quite like that about podcasts.
Yeah, it is part of the charm of the thing. And I think we have to kind of reset our expectations, and not everything has to be a incredibly glitzy Hollywood production. You can communicate really good, really clever, really well crafted ideas without a lot of money, and there's a lot of that out there, and I'm heartened by that.
You know what's kind of sad though? Whenever something like a new invention comes out, right? Like eBay or podcasts or whatever, like there's a window of excitement and potential to it where you think, shit, anyone can do this. Like eBay's this new thing now. Like you can sell all your old like secondhand stuff instead of going to a car boot sale and having to sit out there all day in the cold. Now you just do it online and it's great. And then that window ends, and then like big business or whatever get in, and then suddenly there's an Argos shop on eBay, and it's just shit. Like you search for like, I don't know, Peppa Pig toy, and like the first 5 things are now like sponsored results from Argos, and you're like, this is supposed to be like a car boot sale, what the fuck? And it's the same now with podcasts. But like it started off as this independent thing, people would just record it on a dictaphone and upload it, and now it's like LBC do podcasts and BBC do,
I mean, there's always going to be another emergent medium, and there's always going to I don't know what the next thing is going to be, but these things have cycles, right? In the beginning they're adopted by early adopters, early tech adopters, and they go through a kind of tremendously dynamic and creative period where a lot of weird shit is happening, a lot of really interesting shit is happening, and then after a decade.
Oh, you've frozen.
Big,
yeah, you froze there for a second. Sorry.
All right. I think I still may be frozen. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Anyway, it's these things will always happen, and then as fewer and fewer stations, certainly in the U.S., or radio stations, are broadcasting on AM and FM. What's going to fill the gap as that medium really does die is you're going to get this kind of resurgence of a lot of weird and wacky shit that is going to be really interesting and going to be really kooky. And I think you just have to kind of ride these life cycles of different media like you would ride a wave.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't even considered really that it could just be the prelude to a lot of these radio stations moving completely into the podcasting arena. Because I like when I go out in my car, I listen to the radio, I'll put LBC on. But at some point, we're going to get robot cars that are just, or rocket packs or whatever. Like they must know that radio is kind of on the way out, but podcasting is soaring. So if they can just kind of migrate that market over to people who need something to listen to while they're at the gym or while they're jumping on the tube or whatever, it makes perfect sense to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to get depressed if you look at the top, if you look at kind of what's going on at big macro levels, which is why I look at that lesson, and I'm finding hope in smaller things.
Oh, well, it's good to hear that. I will also try to find hope in things and contain my judgment of other people.
Contain your rage. It's not healthy. It's not healthy.
So I did actually, just quickly, and then I better run inside before I get in trouble, Martin.
Sure.
But yeah, I took a month off the news.
Yep.
And then
how did you feel?
So much better. Oh
yeah,
my god.
Me too. Yeah.
It's I've been doing this thing. Started it last year, and then I did it again this year, where I call it like journalism adjourned, and I just delete all the apps off my phone, and I'll go on Twitter to talk about the podcast and stuff, but if anyone tweets me anything to do with the, like, immediately shut the window. And in one sense, it's really like there's a definite uptick to your sort of mental health and feeling better generally about the world. But secondly, there's a real benefit to be had in terms of just having time to do shit. Like, I noticed I got so much more done because I wasn't obsessing over like endless scrolling, you know?
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
I do too. I've been on a news fast that started in the summer, and I have very, very little inclination to go back.
I bet you were thrilled then to see my email pop in your inbox. Like, come on and talk about the news. I bet you're like, oh fuck.
No. But I think, taking a news fast gives you a different perspective on it. You begin to see things externally in a way you couldn't if you're constantly consuming something. You're not going to get you don't really have perspective or clarity on it. So yeah, I will definitely go back. I teach journalism courses. I teach a journalism module in the spring. I'm going to have to go back and re-immerse in the news. But at the moment, pure bliss, man.
Yeah, and I think, and like you're a father as I am, and I think there's definitely a case to be made for me not standing next to the dishwasher scrolling through Twitter or like checking Sky News, and like when my son's talking to me, like he's trying to get my attention, and I'm like, yeah, just hold on a second, just need to tweet this with a half amusing comment, you know, like I should be listening to him. So like it definitely makes you think about things a little bit more.
Yeah, the revolution will not be on Twitter. No, it will not.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Arab Spring was.
Yeah, they were a different media environment than we were, but I don't know.
Martin, I've got to love you and leave you. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks to everyone else for tuning in, and I'll be back next Friday night with another guest. The audio from this episode will be out tomorrow on iTunes and Spotify, and we'll catch up with you soon. Last comment to make is if you do know anyone that's into politics, tech, dystopia, news, please do flip them a link to the podcast. Just continuing to try to grow it organically. I always have a bit of a laugh that there's no budget behind this. It is all independently produced, and one of the I suppose downsides to that is that it is incredibly difficult to promote, but it is growing and going from strength to strength, I feel. So if you wouldn't mind either leaving us a review or ping the off to people, that would be amazing. And thanks once again to my guest this week, Professor Martin Spinelli, and I'll catch you all next Friday night, 7:30. Cheers.
Thanks, Aid. Bye.